Hello, I'm Algis Lucas, and it's my pleasure to welcome one and all to the 22nd in our What Talk series. Now, there are two senses to the title of the series, What Talks. The first is an acronym, WHAT, which, among other options, stands for Waterside Hypotheses Aquatic Theories. Indeed, all the talks so far have been related to the so-called aquatic ape hypothesis, the idea that peculiarities of the human form are best explained by proposing a more aquatic past in our evolution. The other sense of the title focuses on one of the most important human qualities that makes us unique amongst the primates. In this sense, it's posed as a question: what talks? And the answer, of course, is we do. We alone amongst the primates can speak at will. Ever since I read Elaine Morgan's wonderful, inspiring book, The Aquatic Ape Hypothesis, and her chapter 12, Why Apes Can't Talk, and in fact, everything I've read subsequently, it's been increasingly obvious to me that the most important reason for this bizarre disparity is the fact that we have fine voluntary breath control on top of the autonomic control of breathing that must have evolved in the earliest land mammals. This brain stem centered life support machine that keeps every land dwelling animal breathing 24/7, even during sleep. We humans, on top of this, have something extra. As I'm talking to you here, I'm not even aware I'm doing it, and I doubt you are. As I speak, I'm controlling my exhalation very carefully, making it prolonged and with just the right amount of airflow to pass over my vocal cords to keep making the sounds of speech. And every few seconds, without thinking, I take a sharp and rapid intake of breath, a brand new inhalation of air to continue the speech process. Now, that is indeed a bizarre ability for an ape. Chimps and bonobos, for example, just cannot be trained to do it, despite being able to learn very complex visual symbolic communication. To put it one way, they are dumb literally and not metaphorically. There is, however, one rather obvious scenario where this kind of sharp, quick intake of breath, followed by potentially long exhalations, the perfect pre-adaptation to speech, makes perfect sense. Of course, this is while swimming or diving. Now, these are thoughts I know many people have shared for decades, but it wasn't until about 9 years ago or so that I first heard about a group of scientists who were looking into them seriously. That was when Ulrike Griebel got in touch with me. I was just finishing my PhD on the wading hypothesis at the time, and she very kindly and amazingly invited me to Memphis University to give a talk about it to a very impressive group of students and academics at one of their regular cognitive science seminars. I remember being blown away when a PhD student there summarized my thesis better than I could ever have done myself. And I'll never forget the wonderful hospitality I was shown in my brief stay, the ridiculously wide Mississippi River, and the fantastic atmosphere in the blues clubs on Beale Street. Anyway, since March 2015, I've always hoped that one day I might be able to return the compliment and invite Ulrike to give a talk over here. Unfortunately, as my progress in academia has, shall we say, not quite gone as well as I dreamt, I'm not in a position to do so formally as a representative of a university. So this is the best I can do, I'm afraid. I'm sure Ulrike will tell us about her background herself, and I put a potted biography of her on the What Talks website. But in a nutshell, Ulrike is originally Austrian. And by the way, I'm sorry I stupidly spelt her name wrong the first email I sent out. It should be IE, pronounced E as in German, I believe, whereas EI, as I did it, is pronounced I. So I'm sorry about that. She hails from Salzburg, the home of Mozart, and is a member of the Konrad Lorenz Institute of Evolution and Cognitive Research, just north of Vienna. She's now affiliated with the Institute for Intelligent Systems at the University of Memphis. Dr. Griebel's written scores of papers, mainly about cognition in marine mammals. She kindly shared some with me, and I've put some of them on the website too, for anyone to download and read if they want to. Okay, so enough of my prolonged voluntary controlled exhalations, and thanks to the wonders of modern technology, let's switch from 11 p.m. here in Perth, WA, to practically the other side of the world in Memphis, Tennessee, to whom it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Ulrike Griebel.
All right, hello everyone. It's nice to meet you, even if it's only via Zoom. And oops, this is not the beginning. I'm going to talk about the possibility that diving and flight have something to do with the origins of vocal flexibility and language. So August asked me to talk a little bit about myself and how I was exposed to the aquatic ape theory. So I studied zoology in Vienna, and I was especially interested in marine biology, but also in human biology and ethology in general, in sensory systems and cognition and evolution. So I know I couldn't really make up my mind because everything was so interesting. So I studied, as much as I could. And I also combined these topics for my master and doctoral thesis to, be able to spend time at the ocean and explore one of these or several of these topics at the same time. And later on, I continued with another. So I started actually with marine mammals, with sensory systems, especially the visual system in marine mammals. And later on, I switched to another marine group of invertebrates that is also very intelligent, like marine mammals, and started to study cognition and communication in these guys. And later, when I met my husband, Kim Oller, I also started to learn a lot of things about human development, vocal development, and language from my husband, and started to work together with him. And it's been a really fun collaboration ever since. I was exposed to Elaine Morgan during studying in Vienna. And I just picked up her book. I think it was the Aquatic Ape Hypothesis in a bookstore. And since I had this propensity for being in the water already, studying marine biology, diving, snorkeling, I thought that sounded really interesting. And I was highly impressed with the arguments, and it made all the sense in the world to me. And I also passed it on to my colleagues and my fellow students, and they said the same thing. Yeah, why do we not hear about this in our human ethology classes or human biology classes? So when I met Kim Oller, I also introduced him to Elaine Morgan's books, and he immediately embraced the idea because it just is so important for the evolution of language that we have a pre-adaptation for vocal learning. And that's only possible if you get enhanced neuronal connections of the breathing apparatus. So he was immediately taken with it. And we published several papers where we mentioned it. And I sent these out. It was not the main topic of these papers, but we mentioned it, but we never got any feedback on it. It was more or less ignored. So when Algis invited us for these talks, we decided, okay, it's time to write a paper specifically about the diving issue and the evolution of human language. And so this talk is the first part of this future paper, hopefully. And yeah, so let's get into it. So today I'm going to talk about what is vocal learning and who are the vocal learners in the animal kingdom. And then I'm going to propose, I'm going to present some hypotheses that have been proposed to explain vocal learning. the different evolutionary pressures and constraints that could have been involved. And then the question is being raised, what do vocal learners really have in common? All vocal learners, and I know you know the answer to this already, but not the zoologists in general, unfortunately. And then we have new hypotheses that might explain why it did evolve in humans specifically, and that is the fitness signaling hypothesis. All right, let's go into the vocal learning definition. So we're talking about vocalizations that are being produced by a vocal organ like the larynx in anurans, reptiles, and mammals, and the syrinx in birds. We can discriminate between different forms of vocalization learning. Yeah, there's the vocal production learning, where you change acoustic parameters of the vocalizations. And there is contextual learning, where you learn the usage of signals in new contexts, for example. And you have comprehension learning. So receivers learn to modify their responses to vocalizations that are being produced by others. Now, true vocal learning can also be discriminated in a very limited form of vocal learning, which only is the ability to fine-tune acoustic features of innate vocalizations. And this is usually produced by central pattern generators in the brainstem and is very common in the animal kingdom. But the true vocal learning is the complex vocal learning. And this is defined by the need to hear a sound to form a learned auditory template before the animal can develop a vocalization that matches this template. So this is essentially the ability to imitate sounds and sometimes even to create new sounds by exploration, like in humans or in the humpback whales and some bird species. And this complex vocal learning usually depends, or always depends, on specialized neuronal pathways in the telencephalon, and is actually very rare in the animal kingdom. Now, what kind of evidence do we need for vocal learning? There can be either experiments that show that an animal can learn to imitate sounds of another species or environmental sounds. Some species naturally imitate sounds from other species in their environment, so this is definitely evidence for vocal learning. And you probably have heard of the Australian lyrebird, mockingbirds, Australian starling. They're really good at imitating other species' songs. But some species use their vocal learning to acquire a very specific repertoire. Now, that's species specific, like zebra finches or sparrows. And in this case, it's much harder to prove vocal learning. You have to do experiments to show that it's actually learned and not innate. I have some fun videos and soundtracks for you. The first one is a soundtrack, and I would like you to guess which. Yeah, this sounds like a human, right? But it's actually a harbor seal who grew up with New England fishermen and copied their vocalizations, right? So definitely a vocal learner. Next, I'm going to play a little video of a species that tries to communicate with another species by copying their vocal repertoire, which is super interesting. I'm not sure how successful he is in the communication attempts, but it's really impressive. And for the last one, I'm going to show you the famous Australian lyrebird. Yeah. I'm sure some of you have seen this already because it went viral, because it's really cool.
What bird has the most elaborate, the most complex, and the most beautiful song in the world? Well, I guess there are lots of contenders, but this bird must be one of them. The superb lyrebird of southern Australia. He clears a space in the forest to serve as his concert platform. To persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage, and he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra. It's a very convincing impersonation. Even the original is fooled. He can imitate the calls of at least 20 different species. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And again. And now a camera with a motor drive. And that's a car alarm. And now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
All right, so that's pretty impressive stuff, right? So you think that human voice imitators are good, but some birds are better, I think. Okay, so who are the vocal learners in the animal kingdom? We find it in the following groups: in the birds, in the bats, in the cetaceans, which is the whales and dolphins, pinnipeds, which is the sea lions, walruses, and fur seals, and the elephants, and amongst the primates, only one, and that's us. So we can assume about 8 independent origins given the phylogenetic distribution. The reason why I say about 8 is because in the birds, you can assume either 2 or 3, depending on your preference. So we're talking about the birds next anyway. So here you see that in this phylogenetic tree, that you could either believe that it's only 2 origins and Passeriformes, the sub-Austrian birds kind of lost it, or you assume 3 independent origins. So these groups are the hummingbirds, the parrots, famous Alex, the gray parrot here, and the songbirds, for example, the European starling. Now, it has been speculated repeatedly that flight has something to do with vocal learning, and probably also independently, because, you know, ideas like that pop up sometimes independently. And the idea is that it probably has something to do with the specialization of the motor system to control wing movements for flight, which leads also to increased voluntary control of the breathing or vocal apparatus as well. But nobody has any concrete ideas to offer how this would work. At this point, unfortunately, this is just an educated guess, and it's supported by the fact that we find vocal learners in birds and bats. both of them flying. It could also be something to do with the unique breathing system of the birds. They don't really breathe in and out like we do, but they have a very interesting 4-beat system where air flows unidirectional through the lungs all the time. So when they breathe in, for example, the air goes to the posterior air sacs. They breathe out, it goes through the lungs. They breathe in, it goes to the anterior air sacs, and they breathe out, and then it actually leaves the system again. So with every breath in and breath out, you get fresh airflow through the lungs, which is probably essential for flight because it's very energetically costly, of course. But it might also somehow facilitate vocal learning. Another specialized feature in birds is, of course, that they don't have a larynx, but a syrinx, which sits right on top of the lungs. And they have 2 valve systems on top of the 2 bronchi, which enables them to produce two sounds at the same time, which makes for very interesting songs, of course. When we look at the mammals, we have very different origins all over the place. We have the cetaceans out of the ungulates. We have some in the carnivora, like the seal, sea lions, and walruses. We have the elephant, and we have the bats. So it's spread all over the mammalian kingdom. If we look at the bats, the studies have started quite recently, so we don't know as much about bats as we do about, for example, cetaceans and vocalizations. But there is very good evidence in the greater sac-winged bat, for example, which is easy to study because they roost on trees and not hidden away in caves. And here Knörnschied and her colleagues found that the pups learn complex vocalizations through vocal imitation of adult males, and it doesn't matter which sex they are or whether they are related to the males, which indicates complex vocal learning. And researchers are very optimistic that they will find more vocal learners among the bats in general. And the reasoning about flight is the same as in birds, of course. And another specialized feature that bats have is echolocation, of course, that they share with dolphins or toothed whales. And it cannot really be a requirement of vocal learning because a lot of vocal learners do not echolocate. But on the other hand, it might facilitate vocal learning because if you have a specialized neuronal system already in place for echolocation, it might be easier to adapt this to vocal learning in social communication as well. Now, the marine mammals, here we find vocal learning in the pinnipeds. I already played the harbor seal soundtrack to you. The harbor seal pups learn the mating songs from the adult males. And then vocal learning has also been found in the walruses. They have a lecking system. And here I have to play you another little soundtrack because you probably never heard anything like this. Yeah, you wouldn't think that would come from an animal, right? But you don't expect chainsaw sounds from a bird either. Yes, walruses can do this and many other things. Among the cetaceans, we know, of course, that the baleen whales have beautiful mating songs. For example, the humpback whale songs are really well known. Humpbacks, as well as the bowhead whales, have a lecking system. And humpbacks invent new sounds every season. So they have essentially an open-ended repertoire which changes every year. In the toothed whales, on the other hand, which are dolphins, orcas, etc., they have learned group repertoires, social cohesion repertoires, which they use for social communication and social cohesion, coordinating social activities, etc. And here I have a little soundtrack from the apod of the killer whale of Vancouver. They live in families, and every family has a very distinct group repertoire. And all right, so that was an orca repertoire. So with the marine mammals or diving in general, nobody has a problem with the idea that it requires enhanced conscious control of the breathing apparatus. Everybody is good with that. Often we haven't really demonstrated the neuronal connections, but we just assume them. Here we go. Another vocal learner is kind of an outlier if you ignore the fact that elephants have an aquatic past, which has been proven already. So it's not really an outlier anymore. And they have been shown to imitate human words. For example, this guy, Koshik, an Asian elephant, imitates human words in Korean. And the interesting thing is that he does it while putting his trunk into his mouth and kind of manipulating the shape of the vocal tract to produce these phonations, which is super interesting. Here is the first one is the human saying the word, and the second one is the elephant copying it. Here another one. It also has been shown that elephants have learned contact calls in the wild, so they also have a social cohesion repertoire to manage their complicated fission fusion societies. Okay. Now, amongst the primates, we only have humans. Yeah? There is the claim that auditory sequence learning is a big thing, but it's actually not really very impressive. The thing is that researchers have tried to find, a smooth transition from the primates to a human language by claiming all kinds of types of vocal learning, but it has not been proven very fruitful because intensive training efforts have failed, and isolation or deafening experiments have shown that this has little effect on normal vocalization development because they're all innate. There is maybe some vocal convergence of innate calls of individuals living together, but that's minimal changes, but it doesn't really change the vocalization type at all. Also, crossbreeding experiments have demonstrated that there's a genetic basis for all the call repertoires, or for the repertoires that have been looked at. So we can assume that humans have an independent evolutionary origin in the whole group, which is kind of odd and needs explanation. Now, zoologists have come up with several hypotheses to explain the phenomenon of vocal learning because it's rare and oddly distributed. And there are some that think that vocal dialects might have something to do with it. So that males learn the vocal dialect where they are born, and the local females prefer males with the local dialect. The problem is that you would have already vocal learning in place for that, and it has been shown in several species that females actually prefer outsiders. So it doesn't really work, especially not for all vocal learners. Many people thought that maybe the habitat has something to do with it. So if a species inhabits acoustically different habitats, maybe learning can help to optimize signal transmission. There have been measurement experiments of song differences in different habitats, and they show that the differences are actually minimal. A very good one is the social cohesion hypothesis, which suggests that learned contact calls help identify individuals and group members, besides helping to coordinate social activities. The problem is most social species achieve this with innate contact calls and individual voice recognition normally, right? We recognize each other by voice as well, and so do primates and many other species. Only the parrots and the elephants and some dolphin species use learned group and maybe also individual markers. So why not primates? Everybody agrees also that social complexity drives vocal complexity. Again, why not in the extremely social primates? One of the most complex societies is fission-fusion system. Is a fission-fusion system that we find in dolphins, elephants, and parrots. But chimps also have fission-fusion societies, and they make do with innate vocalizations. Also, social cohesion cannot explain the evolution of mating songs, of learned mating songs. So now, one of the old but really good ones is the sexual selection hypothesis, ever since Darwin and many others, of course. And this proposes that females prefer more complex song and larger repertoire size. And this is easier to achieve with learned vocalizations than innate ones. This argument works for many species with elaborate mating songs, but not the ones with the social cohesion repertoires, like dolphins, orcas, and parrots. And a recent discovery that females actually vocalize and sing as well is viewed as a problem for this hypothesis, but it actually isn't, because sexual selection often goes both ways, especially in pair bonding species, also in humans. It's important to note that the most complex social learning and the largest repertoires are found in mating songs, not in social cohesion repertoires. Social cohesion repertoires usually have a handful of learned or innate calls, and they are usually graded for fine-tuning social interactions, but they don't have huge repertoires. And highly social animals do not have mating songs, interestingly. Our thoughts on this are that socially living animals do not really need elaborate mating songs because they know each other really well from living together, so they don't have to display. This is, of course, completely different if you have, for example, a lacking situation where males and females see each other for the first time, so they can only go by appearance and display. Another idea is that there are certain constraints on the evolution of vocal learning because it is so rare. There could be neurological constraints, like, for example, higher cognition requirements. But if you look at the primates and dogs, that doesn't really work because they are very highly cognitive. And another constraint could be an anatomical one. And for some time, the descendant larynx was popular as a prerequisite, but it has been shown in the meantime that also non-learners have descendant larynxes, like lions and ungulates, etc. And they are usually correlated with a low frequency display, which, it correlates with a bigger body size. And Fitch has also shown that monkey larynxes are actually speech ready. What's really missing is the neuronal connection to the cortex that, that's the reason why they can't really do controlled vocal production of calls. Another idea for constraints are ecological constraints. So there is predation risk. That's always an issue, but that's also an issue for innate vocalizations. But it could be that vocal learners have less predation risk in general. Some of them are top predators like humans, orcas, dolphins, etc. But many songbirds are not. So there should be an analysis whether this is really a common factor, but I really doubt it. And a popular constraint that has been proposed is the three-dimensional environment. So the fact that many vocal learners live in a 3D environment, water, air, or trees, has been noted by several different people again. And the idea is that a 3D environment favors mate choice because male strategies like territorial defense or male-male contest competition or sexual coercion does not work really well in such an environment. And thus it favors sexual selection for mating songs. The problem with the 3D idea is that it also includes trees, which is the home of most of the primates, and none of them have evolved vocal learning, except one primate that does not live in a 3D environment anymore. I don't know whether you know this most recent paper on the 3D environment hypothesis by Verpoten in 21. I have to quote this because it's interesting for this crowd. He mentions that the aquatic ape idea, he mentions it, yeah, which is amazing by itself, right? But he thinks that while the milder waterside hypothesis is uncontroversial and backed up by plenty of empirical evidence, and he cites Finlayson, 2014, it does not provide the necessary 3D environment for this argument to work. And the stronger aquatic ape hypothesis is just untenable. I don't really know what he thinks or what his discrimination is between the stronger and the weaker waterside idea. Maybe you guys know more about this. We can discuss this later. But in the end, he suggests an ancestral arboreal 3D environment for Homo as the reason for vocal learning through mate selection. Again, the question pops up, why not in other primates? Or why not both? There are also aqua-arboreal environments. So what do all these vocal learners really have in common? As we have seen, none of these hypotheses, as useful as they might seem, really combine or explain vocal learning for all the groups of vocal learners, simply because you know simply because there were several different selection pressures possible for vocal learning in different groups. And the problem is that these hypotheses try to explain things at the wrong level of evolutionary events. So what unifies all the vocal learners is not the current utility of their ability for vocal learning, which might be social cohesion or mate attraction, but the pre-adaptations they all have in common, the diving and flight. And if you assume that this is a pre-adaptation that is necessary, then everybody fits in the vocal learners. Not a single one is left out. And by the way, we think that diving is crucial for the evolution of elaborated neuronal control of the vocal apparatus in humans, and especially for the evolution of language. Just wading itself would not have set us apart from other wading apes. Now the question is, why did humans specifically evolve vocal learning? So diving and flight is not a reason per se, because even among the diving and flying animals, vocal learning is rare. So there have to be additional evolutionary pressures at work to make that happen. And the most useful hypotheses of the ones that I mentioned are, of course, the sexual selection and the social cohesion hypotheses. So all the vocal learners today either use it for social cohesion repertoires or for mating songs fitness signaling. Question is, what was it in humans? If we look at comparative evidence, it shows that the most complex and extended repertoires have evolved under sexual selection for mating songs. The question is, could that have been the beginning for humans as well? And many people believe that. On the other hand, if you look at comparative evidence in primates, there are essentially no mating songs at all. They only have social cohesion repertoires, with the occasional duetting, which is pair singing, going on in species that have pair bonds, but they all use innate vocalizations. So extremely social species other than primates do not have mating songs. So in this case, again, human would have to be the exception to the rule. Now we have another idea for this, another hypothesis, which is fitness signaling for a different reason. Here, my co-worker and husband comes into play. His name is Kim Oller, and he was interested in the evolution of language and worked on early vocal development in humans, thinking that it might shed light on the evolution of language, because he believes that development and evolution should follow similar rules. And also he believes in the Evo-Devo paradigm that whenever a new trait is being selected for, it needs to be developed in the infant first. So you cannot just select for a trait that pops up in an adult without developing in the infant first. So he did tons of recordings on infants and realized that infants produce a huge amount of vocalizations before they even start to learn language, which has been termed babbling. And after measuring the actual vocalization rates, also in comparison with our closest relatives, the bonobos, we found the following results. Human infants vocalize spontaneously without any external stimulation or high arousal or distress. They vocalize playfully, exploratorily, usually with neutral affect, and most of the protophones are not directed to anyone. They are just vocal play. In bonobo infants, they vocalize very little. It's almost always with a positive or negative valence. They don't do any vocal exploration, and the vocalizations are always directed to the mother or a group member, even though there's no vocal response from the mother. So in this graph, you can see the vocalization rate in seconds per minute for human infants and bonobos. We coded it in 3 different types. So the innate types, which are laughter and cry and scream, and they're very comparable between the two. But the protophones, which are that's what we call the speech-like sounds, are vastly more numerous in human infants. Again, I need to repeat that human infants produce most of the protophones not directed to anyone. They are really just exploration and play. We looked at the protophone production in different circumstances in the human. First, with no adults in the lab, so the infants were actually alone. This would be this bar, which is the highest. Then we have a condition where an adult is speaking to the infant, which we call infant-directed speech. And then we have a condition where there are adults in the lab talking to each other and ignoring the infant. So, and this is the rate of vocalizations for that condition. This is the rate of vocalizations of all the recordings at home, which combines all these 3 conditions. And all these compared to the bonobo is, of course, vastly different. We also looked at the vocalizations of the mothers in infant-directed speech, and there is, a lot of infant-directed speech going on in the lab, of course. At home too, but not as much as in the lab, because I guess in the lab situation, mothers feel inclined to talk more to their infants. In the bonobos, we didn't even find a single utterance towards the infant, which was really interesting. This graph just shows the same distribution over time, first half year and second half year of vocal rates. So these protophones dominate vocalizations, and they are spontaneous, playful, and mostly undirected, babbling. So why should infants vocalize so much? It's not to practice language, because that would be circular reasoning. They must have had a reason before language ever evolved. And our hypothesis is that this is actually fitness signaling. If you look at the human infant, it is extremely altricial. Because of the upright gait and the increasing brain size in humans, it became more and more dependent on extended parental care, to the point where they were completely physically helpless for essentially 2 years, but not in their vocal capacity. So we proposed that human infants needed to signal fitness to their caretakers in order to maintain the investment that they relied upon. More clues that babbling might be used for fitness signaling is that male human infants vocalize more than female ones, which could be explained by the fact that male infant mortality in the first year is much higher than in females. So they might need to get more investment than females. Also, deaf infants babble at a similar rate as hearing ones, and this has been demonstrated in birds as well. The thing is that fitness signaling, which is advertisement of good genes, always is thought to occur only in mating songs. That's when you display fitness and good genes. But that's actually not true, because fitness signaling can be advantageous whenever there is a limited resource at stake. This limited resource can be a mate, and you fitness signal to impress a potential mate. And if there happens to be competition around, you can also impress or deter the competition at the same time. And this involves the mating songs and displays. A limited resource can be a territory. And to deter competition, you develop territorial calls and songs, for example, in birds. And at the same time, it also can impress the opposite sex, of course. Another limited resource can be an alliance, to make friends with powerful allies. And animals and humans often show off physical and mental prowess in play, games, songs, etc., which also doubles up in impressing the opposite sex, or even to deter competition. But there is a fourth circumstance, and Trivers has written about this very early already, and that is parental investment. So siblings compete with each other over food, shelter, and protection. And not only with the current siblings, but also future ones. Parents often abandon runs, or sometimes even the whole litter or clutch, or whatever you call the offspring, to invest in future litters at better times, for example. So what they're trying to do is to optimize lifetime reproductive success. So our hypothesis is this might be the origin of babbling in general. So there is a recent paper on babbling in vocal learners. Yeah? This paper first tries to give a definition of babbling, so it works for all vocal learners. And it says that babbling is an exploratory stage in vocal development marked by many variable and repetitive vocalizations, for which production does not require a specific social or functional context, suggesting exploration. So that's really important, that it does not require a specific social or functional context, which is also a characteristic of play. And in some species, there's evidence that babbling is also self-rewarding, which is also true for play, of course. And the review found that all known babblers in the birds are vocal learners. So babbling might actually be a prerequisite for vocal learning. But there are, of course, also non-vocal learning species that babble, for example, the marmosets, and they also elicit a higher level of care with it. We know that dolphins babble and some bats, but more comparative research needs to be done before we can really be sure that babbling is really tightly associated with vocal learning. And this is the end of our talk. And here I have another little video for you. And this is a humpback whale baby vocalizing / babbling. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Ulrike. That's fantastic. Wow, such a lot of great stuff there. I've got a list of about 10 questions, but I want to open it up to other people first to give as many people a chance to make comments and ask questions as possible. If you could either raise your hand if you want to ask a question, or maybe put it in the chat. We'll try and get through as many people as we can. Any volunteers? Simon, you got your hand up. Okay, Simon Bearder, please. You're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah.
I've got a question about song. I'm working with some colleagues to study the vocal communication of hyraxes. I don't know if you know what hyraxes are, but they're closely related to elephants.
Closest relatives of the elephant, yes.
And they're quite unusual that some of them seem to use songs, but I wondered how you defined song.
Well, because I define a song in the context of mating displays. Yeah, I mean, that's the common usage in the literature. Yeah, you could also, I mean, the thing is, song is fitness signaling. And as I tried to explain, there are several circumstances where fitness signaling could be useful, right? So song is one of them. Yeah, that's the one that is used to acquire a mate. Yeah, but song, you can define any kind of fitness or variable fitness signaling as song if you wanted to, right?
I see.
Yeah.
So birds have alarm calls. The alarm calls are not, you wouldn't call those song, would you?
No.
But they also have songs. So what is the difference?
You mean sub-songs? I didn't understand what you just said.
If you look at the way birds communicate, they sometimes sing, which they use song, but sometimes they just use calls like other animals. They use calls which are alarm calls or warning calls. Various calls. So what is the difference?
Yeah, there's a difference, because calls are kind of social communication, right? Between conspecifics. The mating songs are usually for a fitness display purpose, like acquiring a mate, defending a territory,
I see.
Acquiring an ally, or acquiring parental investment, in our opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan Foster's got a couple of questions, and maybe if you'd like to articulate them yourself, John. You're on mute at the moment.
Can you hear me with
yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Well, you know, I've spent a long time working with children, developing children's programs, and one thing that's really struck me is the difference between boys and girls. The left and right sides of their brains are connected with a thing called the corpus callosum. And at birth, they basically look the same. But by age 4, testosterone has broken virtually every connection between the left and right for the little boys. So a 4-year-old girl, 100% of what comes out of their mouth is actual speech. Full sentences to a doll, to their parent, to a teacher, where only 40% of what comes out of a boy's mouth are words. And boys are incredible mimics. It's amazing. They see a police car go by and go, they will mimic things. They'll mimic the dog. And as you teach them, you have little toys out, and then they will mimic what the toy should be saying. Like they're adding the soundtrack, which is extraordinary vocal learning, and in both directions. The creation of complex conversation, with a mother-daughter, and creation of a soundtrack for these little boys. Have you considered that? And because I think that is, there's really a bifurcation between boys, males and females. That's my first question.
Yeah, I think that is true, because usually females are considered the more sophisticated vocal learners or speech producers. But I think that it's not as simple as that. It depends very much on the circumstances. Yeah, I mean, males are very good at vocal displays when it comes to presentations, speeches, political speeches and stuff like that. So which are, of course, fitness displays. And that's why it was kind of counterintuitive when we found that boys vocalize more in the first year than girls do, and that needed an explanation. But if you consider that male infants have a high mortality rate, that all makes sense that they would have to display more to get the same amount of investment they needed. Yeah, it goes away after the first year. And I don't think it's you can say in general the females or the males are the best vocal display sex. It's not true. That it's area specific and depends on circumstances. And I think that females are probably better in the social connection domain, in the social cohesion realm, while males are probably better in the sexual selection domain, display.
Right. Okay. So yeah, well, kind of a follow-up with that is that boys think differently than girls. Boys, if you were asked them like where they are, they will see themselves in the middle of a field or in a forest. They will see themselves like spatially different, where a girl will see almost connections between the different people, between them and their dog, and this like a conversation. So they really do perceive the world very differently. And I remember when I first learned about this in the early 1990s, it was amazing, and that there really are two patterns. My recommendation is, I love your talk, by the way, is to really understand that there's a very, very different vocal learning. And if you just focus in on that 4-year-old period of time between 1 to 4, and that they're really not the same. And for teaching tens of thousands of 4-year-old girls and 4-year-old boys, it's quite remarkable. And so that's just one thought. And the other thing is if you look at Homo neanderthal or Homo erectus, they have very, very large nocturnal eyes. And in nocturnal hunting or nocturnal foraging. And that makes sense because there's a lot of stuff food stuff that are available, at night, or there's some advantages. Well, if you're hunting in pairs or in family groups, the vocal learning and being able to mimic other animals, or to trick them, or to give your geolocation, because if you're, you know, at night in the forest or on the water side, you can give your location, you know, I'm over here, you know, as opposed to, because you can't see you. And I just think that if you look at modern humans, you say, oh, we have these diurnal eyes, but 2.5 million years ago, we were a mostly nocturnal species. Have you considered that?
I haven't, actually. I was not aware that this hypothesis is out there that we were a nocturnal species.
Yeah, huge eyes, huge eyes. It's just that's all. Okay.
All right. Well, that's it. Thanks, John. That's a great question. And there are some more questions that John posed in the chat, and I'll make sure that they're put online for everyone to see afterwards. Margajata, you had your hand up, and then I don't know if anyone else wants to go next to that.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
thank you
Margajata.
very much. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. And thanks to Ulrike. This is an amazing talk. I just want to put one little comment. I haven't yet figured out how exactly it relates, but I remember when William Bond, I think, had this proposition that the tales about sirens, mermaids, are kind of remembrance of diving, of communities of diving women like Amma and Hania. And I just wanted to put here, as we, especially that Jonathan was asking about, and Ulrike was saying as well about some gender differences, that as an amateur singer, I can say that singing and breathing exercise, I mean, singing is a lot of a breathing exercise, in fact. I mean, so the divers, when they train the breathing, you know, breath control, that there is a lot of it in singing as well. So, you know, I just thought I put there because I have a feeling that there is sort of connection. But,
yeah. I think I heard it. I heard the comment. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the thing is, once language was established, and incidentally, I believe that every stage of language was adaptive, not just the full-blown version, because even labeling things gives you a huge advantage over other animals that don't have that, right? But once it's established, it can be used for whatever purpose. We use it for social cohesion. We use it for fitness advertising. We use it for information sharing. We use it for everything. Yeah. So, yeah. The question is, how did it start, right? Because we cannot argue that language started it. We have to argue for a different origin. And we believe it's fitness advertising, and fitness advertising of a very specific kind, which we might even find in all the other vocal learners, which nobody has considered yet, okay? Because parental investment has not been considered as a driving force, and that's our idea.
Yeah, that's really new. I mean, we haven't, I believe we haven't discussed that yet at all.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Did anybody else want to go next? Okay, Francesca, you got your finger up there. That's good enough for me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ulrike, for your very interesting talk, first of all. I was wondering if you envisage a scenario where how everything in the end led to language in humans. I mean, where do you think it began? Do you think it began as song? Were our ancestors singing before they were talking? And when do you think that might have been? And it was interesting that what you said about babbling and babies and it coming first from babies. Do you think because also all mothers and babies tend to communicate in song initially, don't they? I mean, mothers sing to their babies, and is there a connection there? Do you think that early ancestors, pre-Homo sapiens, maybe as far back as Homo erectus or before, may have used song in an aquatic environment to not just signal fitness, but also to communicate across water, where after having lost communication by smell, we know sound travels better in water. Could it have been a way of just keeping that social cohesion in a more aquatic environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, once vocal learning was established in humans, but probably via fitness signaling, it can be expanded in all the other realms. Since we were a social living, extremely social living species and cooperative breeding species, it could have been used for all of these things. And it's kind of hard to pin down. Probably you can pin it down to one driving force, but it was so multifunctional that all of these things made it happen really fast or evolve really fast. And I mean, you know, the discussions when exactly things happen, that is really hard to guess. Our guess is that a very simple proto-language probably happened maybe even as far back as 1 million years ago. But these are all, you know, speculations, and they all have their arguments, pro and con, so we don't know yet.
Thank you, Ulrike. Is anybody else who'd like to go next? I'm just looking for visual clues at the faces, because we can't have oral communication all at the same time here. Mark, I'm looking at Mark and Gareth and Humphrey, who've got the screens on. Yeah, go on then, Gareth. That's good enough for me. Finger raised.
A few things. I'm not sold on the Evo-Devo concept that babies have to develop a feature first. I have a beard, never seen it evolved at some point, but I don't think it started with a baby. Humans have permanent breasts. They don't have to get pregnant before they develop breasts, unlike the other apes. This doesn't happen in babies, so that small little point. It was all going very, very aquatic until we got to the end. And then it was babbling, and I lost any aquatic connection with what you were saying. What I did appreciate was the fact that you were suggesting something that was a matter of survival. We don't evolve things just because they're convenient for us or make life easy for us. It's a matter of survival. And where you're saying that parents will abandon their children if they're not up to scratch, which is quite right in many species, this gives a valid reason to attract attention why that would work. I've written a little something, Gareth's hypothesis, about the very, very origins, which I won't take up your time now. I'll post it on AAT in 2 minutes. That's about all, really. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, hair has also evolved in infants for us. You know, at the very beginning, when hair started out to be selected for, right? It was developed in the infant first. It had to develop in the infant first. Yeah. What happens with the specific distribution patterns and hair loss later? These are genetic, you know, determined traits that have been selected for different reasons. But yes, hair in general was developed in the infant first. Many, many, many years ago.
Yeah, I think the example of a beard and breasts are probably more to do with sexual selection, which is an adult thing. So that would explain that. I did like
But
Gareth's
hair in
point.
general is a trait that had to be evolved in the infant first. Right?
I did agree with Gareth's point though about babbling, and it occurred to me when you were talking about that, your different cohorts of the amount of babbling that different groups of infants did. I wonder. I suspect you haven't done this because otherwise you would have put it in the slide. But it'd be interesting to get a community of children who were sort of coastal, maybe the Mucken people or the sea gypsies, to see what kind of babbling their infants were doing. Maybe if they were exposed to water and going into the water early, maybe that might have had a positive effect on the amount of babbling they do.
Yeah, I mean, we wish we would have the opportunity to study babbling more multiculturally, but it's kind of difficult, it's difficult just doing with white populations or Black populations at all, because not a lot of parents agree to do this, so there's a selection factor already here.
We have over 300 infants.
Yeah,
that have been studied in.
So Kim is going to chime in on this because it's his work, and
we have hundreds of infants that have been followed longitudinally, and language backgrounds extremely varied, racial backgrounds extremely varied. We've never found an infant who didn't produce massive amounts of vocalization in the first months of life and continuing throughout life.
Yeah. So we expect what Alice is saying, that maybe water living populations produce even more babbling, but
that we don't have anything on.
Yeah. That's
what we have is simply evidence that it's extremely robust across a very wide range of human beings. Including infants born with Down syndrome, infants born with Fragile X syndrome, infants born profoundly deaf. Everywhere we look, it's incredibly robust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's
I have another. Sorry, I will agree. Those children under the age of a year, there's a lot of babbling, a lot of noise. It's almost like a little, like they're emitting sound, so you know where they are all the time. I don't know how much communication is. Yeah, it's just like, okay, mother's gathering berries, whatever. They always knows where the baby is, where the baby's babbling, the baby's like.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's the idea. That the baby is always giving signals that I'm fine, you can invest in me. If they cry all the time or if they don't vocalize, there's something wrong, right? So unless they're sleeping, of course. But yeah, I think it's a very good measure of well-being that the mothers pick up on, or the caretakers in general.
Has anybody else got a point or a question they'd like to make? There's one other thing I would like to say about the babbling. I don't know if you were aware of the work of Chris Knight. Chris Knight is also a kind of one of the guys that's written a lot about language origins, and he talks about trust and the fact that the spoken word is a very cheap token of communication, and he sort of says that it has to have evolved in an environment where there's a lot of trust. And I think that's a beautiful scenario for this babbling, because mother infant, obviously there's huge amount of trust there. There's not going to be any ulterior motives. So I don't know, I just wanted to ask, are you aware of Chris Knight's work? And I was wondering if maybe this idea could collaborate with his in some way.
Yeah, no, I haven't read his stuff yet, I have to admit. It sounds interesting. I would think that there should always be, a relationship of trust between mother and offspring, or caretaker and offspring. So I don't, see how this would differ from non-vocal mother-infant relationships, other than the fact that human infants are extremely altricial and depend on their parents for a very long time. So that's the whole idea, that they have to communicate their well-being because of that issue. And they have to trust, yeah, of course, they have to trust that they are being taken care of. I don't see how that would, I have to read it, I guess, before I say something about this, you know.
It's written quite a lot about it. I mean, the other point I just wanted to make is just to, you know, agree with your point earlier that you, in your talk. Then you said that you think it's swimming and diving that led to speech, not wading. I absolutely 100% agree with that. I hope I've not misrepresented my ideas in the past, that I'm sort of thinking that only wading was involved and not swimming and diving. I'm certainly totally on board with humans living on the coasts, human ancestors living on the coasts, and swimming and diving, and that seems to me is the perfect precursor to the sort of voluntary breath control that's obviously needed for speech. So I'm definitely 100% on board with that.
Yeah, I just put that in because this guy Verpoten seems to have this distinction between the milder water side and the more extreme aquatic ape idea. And he might have it in his mind that aquatic means diving, water side means just shore living and collection. And that's why it doesn't give you a 3D environment, you know, for humans.
Yeah, well,
that's why I wanted to point this out. I think water side includes diving. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And swimming. I mean, I think the distinction that some people make, I mean, Foley and Law wrote a paper in Evolutionary Anthropology, I think in 2013, around the time of the symposium in London. Coincidentally, they wheel out the big guns just when that conference was going to be around. And they make this point, more or less saying that we can't, where we go too far is in terms of selection. They're quite happy with the idea that we live by the water's edge and we procured food from water, but the bridge too far always seems to be about selection. And that, you know, all of the things that we've been talking about, things like body hair loss and infant adiposity and speech and large brains and all of this stuff, it's all something else. It can't be actually from selection from moving through water. And that's where they seem to draw this red line, which of course I think is completely wrong.
Yeah, it's really weird, yeah, because I have encountered this with Richard too, because he says the aquatic ape idea tries to explain too much, but it's an ecological idea. And how can an ecological idea explain too much? On the contrary, the more features you can explain with this ecological environment, the better the theory is, or the hypothesis is. Yeah? So I don't get it. Why would you have to have independent explanations if the environment explains it already? That's the ideal situation. That's how it should be.
Absolutely.
I don't understand this at all.
Well, it's like John Langdon's paper in 97 when he talks about parsimony. I mean, it seems to go completely against the very definition of parsimony.
Logic. Yeah, it goes against all logic. Yeah.
Okay, does anyone else like to say a comment? Mark, we haven't heard from you yet. Do you want to say something? And Humphrey? Anybody? Mark, go on.
But certainly very, very interesting, but it gives a lot of things to think about still. I was just thinking, if a baby, when the mother was diving and the baby was floating, and when she came out of the water and the baby was babbling, she knew immediately that he was still there. The connection between At which months exactly do babies babble?
They start right from the beginning.
The very first day.
Very first day. Yeah. Even the preemies, yeah, once they get the breathing tube out, they start vocalizing right away. Yeah. It's a deeply
until how many months?
Well, you know, in the second
0 to
from around 6 to 9 months, they start canonical babbling, which is repeated syllables, and then they start learning words, and then babbling, of course, stops or becomes, you know, changed into other forms of communications.
They continue babbling in a second.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm a granddad now. I've got a 3-month-old granddaughter, and she's definitely starting to vocalize a little bit. Malgorzata, you got your hand up again. Do you want to say another comment?
Yes, just one very little comment about fitness signaling. I mean, we are, I mean, even today, I mean, if a baby, if a newborn is silent, that's alarming. So
that's alarming.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, go on, Mark. Yeah.
Could you provide a list of all babbling species? Is it possible? Is it in it?
Well, if you look at that review, it's 21, right? 2021, the review paper on babbling. You find citations to all the species that have been studied in this respect yet. So I can send that to Algis as well, so he can send it out. And the list is getting larger as we speak, because now people's attention is on the babbling. Yeah, they're actually looking for it and finding it, you know, in the vocal learners, but also in some non-vocal learners who just do the same thing with innate vocalization. They just use innate parts of their adult repertoire to attract attention and parental investment. For example, the marmosets. They are also social breeders, so it's they can elicit care from not only their mother but also other members of the group. So fitness signaling here makes sense for them too. I know that the COVIDs are really good imitators as well. I mean, so many birds are. I know they're fun.
You say that paper, the 2021 paper, is that one of the 7 that you linked me to?
No. I just sent you papers that we published, but if you want that one, that review on babbling, I'll send that out.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kim is a co-author, actually. Yeah. So
okay, well, time. Go on. Sorry.
He tweaked the definitions of babbling because he's a baby whisperer. He's probably the person in the world that knows most about infant vocal development in the first year. So he's the right person to ask. He's going to be speaking in 2 months, and we'll continue this story for you.
Great. Looking forward to that. Okay, well, look, time's ticking. I'm going to offer one more opportunity for someone to make a comment, and I think we should then thank Ulrike for a lovely talk and very informative and very interesting.
Thank you.
Malgorzata, would you like to say so? Oh, is that a wave or is that a hand? Okay, it's just a wave. So, well, thank you very much. I think that's fantastic. So really interesting. I'm really looking forward to Kim's talk in a couple of months.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.